needs no real introduction. Most of you have taken his classes in the past. And as I heard in the bathroom, yes, this will be on the test. The Center for Geoinformatics Chief of Geodesy, Mr. Cliff Mugnier.
Come on. Y'all stay awake for this now. All right. Satellite geodesy, from whence it came. 1957. Some of you are old enough to remember this. Sputnik. And scientists at Johns Hopkins University noticed that there was a Doppler shift with the beeps from Sputnik. And with that, they figured that they could employ the Doppler shift to develop a ranging system where with either multiple passes or multiple satellites or a combination of the two, they could do positioning on the Earth's surface. The system of how big the Earth was, its shape, and some elements of the gravity field was first developed in 1959. That was the WGS-59, and essentially that's what they used for the initial targeting of the Atlas intercontinental ballistic missile. In 1960, they came up with another one. When I was in the service in the late 60s, early 70s, that was the top secret ellipsoid of the time. And they had upgraded it from 57. It was the first astrogeodetic world datum, and it used a lot of theodolite observations, primarily with Mugnier T4s, not T2s, T4s, to determine the tilt of the Earth's gravity field. Again, the primary purpose was for targeting intercontinental ballistic missiles against the Soviet Union. C-Core was the first transmitting satellite. It was an Army system. Back in 1968, for a while I was a company commander at Army Map Service, and I had to court-martial a Spec 5 sergeant, and it was the first courts-martial Army Map Service had since World War II. I had over 100 PhDs as soldiers that I commanded, and on occasion they would have to be retaught how to salute, but most of the time they just sat at a desk and punched IBM cards and ran statistical analyses. Anna was a civilian satellite with much the same purpose. The problem with C-Core, Anna, and these early satellites was they'd only put up one at a time. For instance, with C-Core, the disciplinary action I had to pull was for a soldier who was in Chiang Mai, Thailand. And he had a little bit too much Thai whiskey and punched out his NCO in charge because they would have to sit in one spot for 4 to 6 months and record a single satellite pass to develop a latitude and longitude that Army Map Service would spend a month computing to get one latitude and longitude. And that Chiang Mai satellite station was used for radio positioning for the B-52 bombing of Hanoi Harbor. So it lasted about 1.5 years, 2 years, and the NVA Army came over and blew it up. So it was pretty effective as far as the NVA was concerned. Helmut Schmidt was a German V-2 rocket scientist, and he was at Aberdeen Proving Grounds for a number of years, and he took T4 theodolites and took out the telescope and put in a mapping camera and developed what's called a ballistic camera or a phototheodolite. I have one. There's It's a hernia in a box. And when he finished up at Aberdeen, he then went over to the Coast and Geodetic Survey, now the National Geodetic Survey, and they started the Coast and Geodetic Survey BC4 satellite network, where the satellites, Pagios, were big aluminized balloons, and they'd photograph them in the night sky against a star background and photogrammetrically triangulate the satellites by several BC4 camera stations. And this was the first major connection of all of the continents of the world using artificial satellites, but it was done photogrammetrically. When I was a captain, I went over to NOAA, and I was introduced to Dr. Schmidt, and he was so impressed by seeing a Corps of Engineer captain that he looked me up and down and grunted and walked off. That's a BC4 camera. That one is mine, and I'll pull that out once a year. Let the students fiddle with it for a couple hours to see how the old timers used to do it, and then we put it back in the box and for another year. The camera is 125 pounds, not including the T4 base, which is 96 pounds. There's the satellite, Pagios, just a big aluminized mylar balloon. With that, they came up with the World Geodetic System of '66, and another improvement further developed by more and more gravity observations and increasing the potential accuracy of the United States intercontinental ballistic missile fleet. Sea Corps would take months in one spot, which was not exactly operationally feasible for the Navy and the Air Force, because the Air Force had the ballistic missiles. So the Navy came up with the transit system. In the transit system, they had several satellites, and it was specifically designed for the Polaris submarine fleet and the intercontinental ballistic missiles on board submarines. And they would be able to get up to periscope depth, any ocean in the world, and sit there for just a few hours. And they would be able to get a position of where they were to within a few meters, and that was plenty good enough to then launch a ballistic missile from the submarine and hit any silo in Kazakhstan, at Turitan, or Soviet city that they wanted. And this was the beginning of major operational capabilities of the ICBMs during the Cold War. And with this is a receiver. You could actually pick the receiver up and no longer had to take an 18-wheeler truck, which is what we had for Sea Corps. This was a Magnavox MX-1502 receiver with an antenna, and we were still using those back in the late 80s when I was down in South America. And that was WGS-72. It was top secret, designed for the Navy, for the submarine fleet, and it was later declassified at the urging of a number of executives in oil companies who were responsible for major funding for a number of senators. And they convinced the senators that if they wanted to keep pulling in funds to their war chest for political campaigns, they would coax the Navy into declassifying the transit system. So in '74, Thomas Zeppelin published transformation parameters from native datums all over the world into WGS-72 and vice versa. And with that data, they also declassified the system, and that's when civilian surveyors started having access to geodetic satellite systems. And offshore surveying really blossomed in terms of reliability and accuracy. That was good, but it was, even if you'd occupy a position for several days, it was only good to a meter or two. And the Air Force wanted something that would give them instantaneous positioning, so they came up with the Navstar system, or what we call GPS. And the ellipsoid that they use, WGS 84, is extremely similar to the geodetic reference system of 1980, which was established by the International Union of Geodesy and Geophysics. And the difference between the two is the semi-minor axis of the ellipsoid in the 14th decimal place. That's GPS. And it's a constellation such that every point on the surface of the Earth has a minimum of 4 to 5 satellites, 24 hours a day, continuous coverage. With 3D positioning, we've got latitude, longitude, and ellipsoid heights. Problem is height isn't the same as elevation, which is the main topic of what Bill Henning will be talking about for the rest of the day. And when we use the proper field procedures to develop an ellipsoid height, we're still going to be dependent on the mathematical formula or guesstimate of what the gravity field is, and that is how we obtain elevations from GPS. We get ellipsoid heights from GPS, and then we need the geoid to compute the difference, so that the final answer, what you have to deliver to your clientele, are elevations. Back then, problem was the geoid was top secret. That's what scared the bejesus out of the Soviets and was the primary reason for the fall of the Soviet Union, is they realized that they did not have the economy to come close to matching the United States. And when Reagan came up with Star Wars, that was the last straw. And it was our knowledge of the geoid. Back in the 1950s, when we started building the first intercontinental ballistic missiles, after we had developed the atomic bomb and the hydrogen bomb, there were a number of men who wore seersucker suits in the summertime, and they got on airplane flights with Aeroflot, which was the national airline of the Soviet Union, and they flew all over the Soviet Union, with every milk run and podunk airport there was, and all of these Americans had one thing in common. They had terrible digestive systems and bladder control, and every time the plane landed, they'd get up with their luggage, which was a little aluminum suitcase, and they'd go to the restroom at the airport. And this went on for a number of years. And an officer in the KGB was going for a graduate degree, and he enrolled in an introductory course in geodesy at the University of Moscow. And that's when he realized what a gravity meter was for and what it looked like. And they realized that these guys were Air Force counterintelligence agents, and they were collecting gravity observations at every airport in the Soviet Union. And that's what enabled us to get the fantastic accuracy of our intercontinental ballistic missiles, far better than what the Soviets had access to. So they no longer allowed these men with gravity meters to get on Aeroflot flights. And that's a sketch of the relationship of the topography, the ellipsoid, and the undulations of the Earth's gravity field in a kind of an estimate of what a layperson would call mean sea level. Here's a gravity meter. Some of my graduate students occupied by Fort Pike on Highway 90 by the Wrigley's Bridge. J92 was a favorite spot of the National Geodetic Survey for tying elevations to that, because they thought out in the middle of the marsh it had to be a fantastic spot. And it was later noticed by Professor Daka that it was one of the fastest moving spots on the North American continent in terms of subsidence. So, oh well. That's an FG5, absolute gravity meter. We've had this used for observations through about half of our core sites throughout the state of Louisiana, a number of them multiple times, and we've found that the increase in absolute gravity is tracking almost perfectly with first order leveling epochs, particularly at the University of New Orleans, 9.5 millimeters a year. And here's a T4. This one was used for determining deflections of the vertical with a CCD camera instead of an eyepiece. Dr. Herb Stoughton, now retired in Cheyenne, Wyoming, he was the project engineer for that. And that was used for determining deflection of the vertical for the MX missile program. And that was the last straw that caused the fall of the Iron Curtain. 1991. So you hear about the geoid. What does the geoid look like? There it is. It's an equation in spherical harmonics to degree 360. And a geoid consists of coefficients of a polynomial. That's what the geoid is in actual practice. So you program that, you plug in your latitude and longitude, and out pops a number, which is the distance between the ellipsoid and the geoid. And that's the magic Rosetta Stone to get elevations out of GPS observations. So, came out with the National Height Modernization Study by NGS, and that was the beginning of what we do now, which is called GPS leveling. It's unfeasible to re-level the United States with Invar rods and precise instruments because it costs about $1,500 a mile. And there's just not enough money left over from everything else we're spending on to do first order leveling. So NGS said that with the declassification of the geoid, that is how engineers and surveyors in the future will be able to obtain reliable elevations using GPS observations. So now we've got GPS, Global Positioning System, which is an Air Force system, GLONASS, which is a Russian system, which from time to time works and from time to time doesn't work. There's the Galileo, which is a European system, which the Europeans think may work someday. And COMPASS, or BeiDou, which is the Chinese system, and no one's really sure how geodetic it's going to be and whether or not it has anti-eye satellite cannons on it. So that's about it for the history of geodetic satellite systems, and I'm so old I actually lived through all of it. Are there any questions? All right, well, thank you. And our next speaker is Mr. Bill Henning, who's going to cover the rest of the